Welcome to this edition of Public Affairs Public Access, brought to you by the League of Women Voters Education Fund in conjunction with Houston Media Source. This edition, we'll be talking about something very important, and that's voting. We'll do our best to give you all the information you need to get out to the polls and exercise your right to vote. We have some very special guests here with us tonight to talk to you about the ins and outs of voting, voter ID, information, location, and everything you need to do to exercise your right. So I'll cut right to the chase. If you'd like to call in tonight, you can call in at 713-807-1794 and join in the conversation. So first up with us tonight, this edition, we have with us Ms. Jasmine Turner with Houston Black Leadership Institute, as well as Amy Turney with the League of Women Voters Houston area. So, just to kind of set the tone, if you could just introduce yourself to the viewers and give them a bit of information about some of the things you're involved in and what you do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Quentin. Thank you for having me. As he mentioned, my name is Jasmine Turner, and I am a graduate of the Houston Black Leadership Institute, Class 3, as well as the president of the Houston Area Urban League Young Professionals. And one of the things that we did for our class project for Houston Black Leadership Institute was to implement a program called Empower 360 Houston. That program is being implemented into high schools to encourage students to be a part of the voting process. And so far it's been very successful, and we just want to provide more information to the public about the program and looking forward for it to expand into the Houston area.
Okay, thank you. And Amy?
Well, hi, Quentin. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters and of the Houston area. And a few years ago, y'all might remember I used to chair forums and debates, so sometimes y'all would see me on the conversations with the candidates. And tonight I made a slideshow to talk about the who, what, when, where, and how to vote that's going on right now. Early voting ends tomorrow at 7 o'clock in the evening, and then of course Election Day is November the 8th. I have some important information to let y'all know about and some telephone numbers you can call for more information.
Okay, great. So what we'll do, just to clarify, we'll tell you everything you need to know, but we won't tell you who to vote for.
That's right.
Because that's your decision, it's your choice, and it's your right. So, there's been a lot of talk lately, and just a bit of also some confusion, because when you go to the polls, you need to bring an ID, right? And so I know there's different types of IDs that are allowed that will give you the access to vote. Mm-hmm. And so I was hoping, Amy, that you'd be able to share some of that information with us and with the viewers.
Sure. Great. Mark's got the slide up for us. There are 7 different forms of identification that are acceptable at the polling location. Yet if you don't have one of these 7 forms, I'll talk about this in a minute, what you can do otherwise. So those 7 forms of identification are the Texas driver's license that's issued by the Department of Public Safety. It has to be current, or if it has expired, it has not expired for more than 4 years. Texas Election Identification Certificate, which is issued by the DPS, and the same has to be current or have expired no more than 4 years. A Texas license to carry a handgun, issued by the DPS, current or have expired no more than 4 years. A United States citizenship certificate containing the voter's photograph, and this one has no expiration date. A Texas personal identification card issued by the DPS, current or has not expired for more than 4 years. U.S. military identification card containing the person's photograph, current or has not expired for more than 4 years. And then The last one is a United States passport that is current or has not expired for more than 4 years. So what I've been hearing and what I witnessed is the clerks are standing outside the polling locations telling people, not outside of the door of the polling locations, the early voting locations, telling people to have their identification ready. Now, I haven't seen anybody that's come to a polling location that didn't have their identification, so I don't know what happens, how the county clerk has trained them otherwise. If people don't have that type of identification. But there's been some confusion over voter ID. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decided that the voter ID law is in fact discriminatory and that it keeps people who are financially disenfranchised, and particularly minorities, from being able to vote because they may not have the means of obtaining one of those forms of identification. There are over 50 counties in Texas that don't even have a DPS. If you look at Harris County, the DPS offices are all outside of Loop 610. So if you lived in this neighborhood right here, you might have to take 2 or 3 buses to get to a DPS if you have the information that you need to get that type of identification. So for instance, my grandmother, who was born at home in 1900, of course she's not still with us today, but let's say that the law had been passed in 1988. She was still with us then.
Okay.
So she was born at home in 1900. She never had a birth certificate. And she was born before cars, and when she learned how to drive a car, she decided she didn't like it a whole lot, and so she just wasn't going to drive a car. So she took streetcars, the bus. Her husband drove her places, but she never drove, so she never had an identification. And people say, oh, you have to have an ID to do this, this, or this. There's always a workaround. And this is what the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision is about. It's to provide people that don't have these types of identification a way to still vote. And so if we'll move to the next slide.
So let me ask you one question as well, though, because you mentioned about being able to access and get to transportation. And there's some hearsay. I've heard that, and we always hear things, right? Does the state provide access or provide a way for people to basically give them a ride from their home to a location to get their ID?
No, they do not. One of the things that they were doing, and I'm not sure if they were doing that this year, was there was a mobile unit that was going around for the voter ID, which the qualifications for the voter ID are the same as a driver's license or a Texas ID. The voter ID is only good for voting. You can't use it at the bank. You can't use it to book a flight. So you might as well get the Texas ID if you don't drive a car. But again, there were supposed to be some mobile units that were going around the state, and I don't know how much money was allocated for that, but I suspect with the way that things have been going, it wasn't very much.
Okay. So now I'm a voter. I go to the polls, and you know what? I realize I don't have a valid form of ID. So now what?
So the clerk may ask you. The clerk's going to ask if you have one of those forms of identification.
Okay.
And if you do, and you don't come with it, they're going to recommend, especially during early voting, that you go home and you get it and you bring it back. If you just absolutely do not have one of those forms of identification, this is what's important for those of y'all who don't have one of these forms of identification. And the clerk can also suggest that you bring one of these forms of identification. A valid voter registration certificate. That means this year's voter registration certificate is blue and white. I've seen people using the orange and white certificates from last year. That's not valid. So you need the blue and white voter registration certificate. A certified birth certificate, a copy of or an original bank statement, a copy of or an original government check or paycheck, a copy of or an original current utility bill, And finally, a copy of or an original government document with your name and address on it. If that document has a photograph on it, then it must be an original, not a copy of it. And I believe if you're registered to vote, chances are you have that voter registration certificate somewhere around your house. So if you haven't found it yet, you've got till next Tuesday to find it. What I don't want to encourage you to do, though, is to show up at the polls and say that you don't have one of those forms of identification when indeed you really do. Because that's perjury if you're saying that.
So it's a crime.
Well, I don't know that anybody's going to do anything about it, but also it's going to slow down the lines.
Sure.
What's going to happen is you will have to sign a provisional affidavit in order to vote this way. And so if you remember when the new laws went into effect with voter ID and people were presenting their IDs, and particularly women who hadn't changed their name.
Their maiden names, yes.
Right. I think it took me 10 years to change my name. I wanted to be sure. All right, this is going to stick. So it took me a while to change my name to what it is now. So for years I had it as Amy Mobley and nobody ever questioned it. Well, now with the voter ID law, your names were supposed to match. And if you just really wanted to keep your certificate the way it is, then you were supposed to sign an affidavit that said you were indeed that person. And that slowed down the line. The same thing will happen here if you're coming with another form of identification, is you have to sign that affidavit. Also.
So what does the affidavit say? I mean, what does it include?
I don't have the verbiage for that affidavit. You're basically saying you don't have that form of identification and you're providing this other form of identification. Now, if you show up without either one of these, then you can vote provisionally, and then you have 6 days to provide that identification to the county clerk. But in that situation, you're going to have to go downtown to the county clerk's office to give them that identification. And you just think about it. How hard is it to take care of this on Tuesday? Voting day will be next Tuesday, and then you've got 6 days. Are you really going to go down to the county clerk's office and give them that identification with all the busy schedules that we have these days? So I do encourage you to have one of those forms of identification handy when you do go.
Yes, because I actually spoke to Rita earlier today, and I think because of the Court of Appeals and then the added opportunities for people to provide information, she mentioned that you have to say or make a statement as to what reasonable impediment that you faced as to why you couldn't provide the 7. So the state or the federal ID, forms of ID, whether you had transportation issues where you couldn't get to an ID, or you had family issues or work, or some of those impediments that kept you from acquiring a photo ID, and then from there you have to sign and say, I agree to this, and then provide the other information. So
I believe you're correct.
Yeah. So now the other thing though is, so it's a utility bill, correct? You did mention that. And then was there something else?
A bank statement.
Bank statement. Okay.
Birth certificate, your voter registration certificate. Let's see, what else? A government check or paycheck, or a copy of an original government document with your name and address.
So now I don't have an ID, and I fill out the affidavit, and then I provide one of these. So they'll allow me to vote. Now, but will my vote count?
Yes.
It will. Will it count provisionally, or will it count?
No, it will count. You're signing that affidavit there. Now, if you vote provisionally, it's because you don't have any of that information.
So I just want to make it clear. So even if I do go to the polls, I don't have an ID, I don't a valid form of ID, I don't have the additional forms of verification. I can still cast a ballot.
provisionally.
Okay.
And what that means is the election judge is going to enter a special code for a provisional ballot. There is going to be an envelope. He's going to take, the judge is going to take, he or she is going to take you over to the side, and y'all are going to fill out some information on this envelope. And a ticket's going to be printed out with a special code. And that ticket will be put in the envelope of the provisional ballot. So when the early voting ballot board goes through the provisional ballots and they see whether or not you've brought that other form of identification in, they'll say yes or no, this vote should be counted. Then they take that code from the envelope, and then that vote is counted. Otherwise, the vote is not counted. And anybody that their vote is not counted will get a letter in the mail stating why their vote was not counted. So that would be because you didn't come within the 6 days
Okay.
to provide that identification.
So, okay. No, that makes sense. So now we've gone through all these exhaustive efforts to make sure people understand what they need, what they can bring, what they're required to bring. Where do I go to vote? I mean, I know it may seem trivial, but it varies from place to place, correct?
It does, from county to county. You're so lucky to live in Brazoria County because you can go to any polling location in Brazoria County all day long on election day. But if you live in Harris County, I encourage y'all to vote early. On election day, you are limited to the polling location that is where you are registered to vote. That would be in your precinct. And
is there a website I can go to find this information?
There certainly is. So the first slide I want to show, y'all can't see it on television very well, but you can go to a website called harrisvotes.com to get this map of the early voting locations.
Okay.
Another thing I didn't write down, I didn't put in the slide, is if you use the Google search engine and you type in "where do I vote" and then put in the address where you are right now, then the 3 closest polling locations to you should show up. And then you can even click for directions and it will give you directions to get there. So that's a pretty nifty feature. But if you don't have the internet, I'm moving on down to the next slide because there's some great telephone numbers on the next slide and some websites. And that is the one that says vote in your precinct on election day, November 8th. And a website that you can go to in Harris County is harrisvotes.com. Telephone number that you can call in Harris County is 713-755-6965. You can go to our website for our voter's guide. We have a telephone number as well, and we're volunteers, so we're not there. We're not in the office like a lot of other organizations are, but we typically have someone there at least in the afternoons, and the telephone number there is 713-784-3429. Our website address is lwvhouston.org, where our voter's guide also has a map of all those early voting locations. And then if you live outside of Harris County, you can use a website called votetexas.gov, and the telephone number for them is 1-800-252-VOTE. But all of the counties surrounding Harris County on election day will be able to vote at any polling location in the county. I think the delay with Harris County is they're only going to be able to reduce their polling locations by 20%. That's the way I believe that I believe that's the requirement right now, and so you're looking at 900 polling locations, so you're still going to have a little over 700 polling locations, and the polling locations need to be able to know if you have voted somewhere else. So all of those polling locations will need to have some type of equipment that can tell in real time whether you voted somewhere else. And I believe that's what the delay is right now in Harris County. But y'all've got it easy in counties surrounding us.
So I didn't, that's it's good that you mentioned that, because I didn't realize that every county outside of Harris has that available to the voters.
Yeah, I don't know that it's the entire state, but I do know that if you're in this viewing area, then you will be able to vote. Unless you're in Harris County, you'll be able to vote at any early voting location, any voting location on Election Day. Now, to find your precinct number, the slide's up on the screen right now. If you look at your voter registration certificate, there should be a box that says precinct, and that's where you find your precinct number. And on Election Day, that's where you would go to those websites, harrisvotes.com or votetexas.gov. harrisvotes.com would be the best. It would be the most current, and that's where you find where you vote in your precinct. And for those of you who have moved and you haven't updated your voter registration, or you work across town and you have to leave early in the morning, you might want to think about that. Are you going to have time to make it back to the polls by 7 in the evening? If you have moved and you didn't update your voter registration, you need to plan accordingly to make sure you make it to the polling location before 7 in the evening, because I can get to Austin faster than I can get to some parts of Harris County.
Yeah, so you did bring up vote centers, and so I just want to let some of the viewers know what vote centers are. Vote centers during early voting location, I think in Harris, here during early voting, you can vote anywhere, correct?
Right.
Yeah,
46 locations.
46 locations in Harris County. In the surrounding counties, what's so special or significant about vote centers is that even after early voting, additional polling locations will open, and regardless of where you live, in whatever precinct you live in, you're able to vote in any of the locations that say vote here, which is all of them. So any polling location you go to, you'll be able to enter, provide the required information and identification, and you'll be allowed to vote, and it'll count back towards your precinct. So those is pretty significant, and I'm really happy that the counties are adopting this and they're giving people access. And so it really minimizes the confusion, because as you know, sometimes when the county goes to get the locations or confirm the locations, they may be different 2-4 years ago because the venue may be booked.
Mine is different, and I think we've been voting at our polling location for over 50 years.
Yeah.
And I'm planning on making a flyer, and I'll be spending my weekend walking my entire precinct, putting out a flyer to let people know that we're voting down the street.
So you mentioned something. So if I go to the polling location and I have any type of question, am I allowed to call the secretary's office, or who can I call if there's a conflict or I don't agree with maybe the decision that's being made? Is there any way to?
Well, I would encourage y'all to call us. The reason is we'll be manning a hotline at a television station all day long. I won't mention it since we're at another television station. But, oh, I can. It's KPRC. So,
Okay.
however, we'll probably be on other television stations as well, giving out the same information, but not about that hotline, but I do recommend that y'all call us, because our telephone numbers will be forwarded to KPRC, or you can look at KPRC and call that number. And we've got people standing by there, and if we come across something unusual, we have relationships with an organization called Election Protection. And there are lots of organizations throughout the United States that are participating in this, and there will be attorneys on standby. I know the parties tell you to call the party and let them know, but in the end, they're not going to follow through unless it benefits them and their candidate. So if you really want for something to happen, you want to call a nonpartisan organization. And these attorneys already have things written up in case they need to file anything with the court system. And also we can explain things well. One of the things that's been happening lately is people have heard the rumor that their votes are being flipped. And usually after we have a conversation, we decide that their vote wasn't flipped. and they were able to take care of that. And if you want to ask me more about that, I'll be glad to tell you.
We'll get into that a little bit later. So, a lot of the things that we talk about have to do with education, educating people on what they need to bring. And, Jasmine, one of the things that you and I spoke about was actually educating people on the process. There's a lot of people that outside of what to bring to the polls, they don't even know enough or what's on the ballot, and what happens if I vote for certain people, what do they do? So I was hoping you could, kind of share with the viewers and us here a little bit about what you mentioned or alluded to about the programs that you're instituting in the schools.
Yeah, so what we discovered when we were doing our project was that people between the ages of 16 and 24 are the least likely to vote. Well, those 18 to 24 are the least likely to vote, and it's due to a lack of education, a lack of influence from growing up, just not really being a part of the process to begin with. And so what we decided to do was to create like a toolkit for students that we can put into the high schools to tell them what the process is on how to vote, what election cycles are, who the candidates are, and then all of those different roles and elected officials, like the railroad commissioner. It's not about railroads. It's really about energy and things like that. And so our program essentially runs through, it's a 5-day course, and the first course is about the history of voting. So it goes through the political parties and how they started, and it also talks about people's, like the women's suffrage and civil rights, to give people some perspective that we couldn't always vote. And so it really talks about why it's important to vote and the types of people that really fought for those rights. And then we also go into voting, like you said, like bringing the IDs and how to register to vote in the first place. These are high school seniors. They'll be turning 18 soon, or if they're 17 in 10 months, we can register them while they're in school. And then during the election seasons, we can encourage them to vote. We're also hoping that they can influence their families as well. So on the third day, we talk about influences. So what's going to influence these kids to vote or not to vote? A lot of times, the households that they're in are, they hear things from people, oh, like my vote doesn't count, or Texas is a whatever state and you shouldn't vote because it's not going to change, or things like that. And we really want to break through and kind of open up that dialogue to the students to tell them, well, it's not really about if the state is red, blue, green, purple, whatever. It's really about having your voice heard and how important it is to be involved in the local elections. And you can make an influence on your neighborhood today, as opposed to waiting every 4 years to make a decision on who's going to be the president of the United States, which I think is another thing we go over as well. It's not just about every 4 years. It's really about every single election cycle and making sure that you know who's on the ballot, stay engaged, and let your voice be heard.
So now you talk about the program. What's it called again?
The program is called Empower 360 Houston.
Okay, Empower 360 Houston.
Yes.
And so how'd the name get formed? Or what's the concept behind the name Empower 360?
So we, the class, we actually did a poll, and we came up with
so this
some
class,
different
hold
ideas.
On, is this class? Hold on, let's kind of back up. We're jumping around. So this class, tell us about the class. Right.
So the class, it's the Houston Black Leadership Institute. It is through the Greater Houston Black Chamber. They are our auxiliary, or we are the auxiliary of them. And so that organization was created essentially to develop young professionals, African Americans in the community who are already leaders in their own right, but then to kind of provide them some resources, tools, access to certain people, and just to kind of teach them how to navigate through certain systems in the city of Houston. So as they progress through their careers or their political endeavors, they kind of have those tools and resources to be successful in the future.
Okay, and so part of that kind of led to the implementation of being engaged in the process,
right.
The electoral process, correct? Right. And so do you have any target areas or partner schools or I mean, what school systems are you working with? I mean, is it Is it formalized, or can you kind of go into that?
Yes, so currently right now we are in Kashmir High School through Pro Unitas. They are a nonprofit that partners with the high school, and so we have been working with them to help implement the program. We currently just had our first class day on Tuesday, so a couple of our classmates went in and talked to the students about the program, and the teacher did the lecture on the program, and I heard some really great feedback. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend, but I heard really great feedback from the students and the teacher that they are really thankful for a program like that, and it really has influenced them to, if they can't vote this election or if they're not registered at this point, then at least to kind of talk to their family members about why it's important.
So it's a curriculum that fits in.
Correct. It's a 5-day engagement guide. So, so there are 5 days, and on the 5th day, they actually have an opportunity to participate in a mock election. And so they have different activities each day that will lead up into that election. So they'll have some political parties that they'll break into as a part of the activities on one day, and then they'll have a debate, and then they'll have certain issues that they'll argue over, and on the 5th day they'll vote on which side of the argument that they'll vote for.
Okay, so now, are there any current plans to expand this outside of? Is this like a pilot school, or?
This is our first school. It is our pilot school. We do have some intentions to expand in the future. It'll most likely be in the spring for it's for high school government classes. So we're targeting those teachers at those schools.
Okay, so expanding different schools. I mean, is there any help you might need to do that, or volunteerism?
We're definitely always looking for certain community partners to partner with us so we can help implement them into the schools. We'll definitely be having some dialogue with different school officials and different school districts around the Houston area, just so we can start that and get those into the schools.
There's an organization that would be a great partnership.
Are they sitting right next to me?
We think so.
Right. We think so, right here. You know, that we can definitely kind of get that started. So, no, but we appreciate it. And so, you know, we hear you talk on TV about millennials, right? And
yes.
There's this huge swing of millennials and trying to get them out to vote. And so I think this would be a great way. And I know the league has done a phenomenal job of registering voters, especially in Harris County. I don't know if you could speak to that, Amy.
Oh gosh, I couldn't give you the numbers. I know in the last year we've registered about 10,000 voters.
Yeah.
And Pam Gaskin, she's our voter registration chair for events besides the naturalization ceremonies. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that she ever sleeps. I think we had at least one voter registration event every day for about six weeks, and in that period, I know that we registered in just a few weeks. We registered about 1,100 voters. We have partnerships. One of the partnerships we had was with the Houston Public Library, who, by the way, y'all, has our voters' guides, and I know that news stacks are being shipped out to the library branches right now. And we registered voters at their locations. We had the Houston Food Bank, British Petroleum had us out to their offices on National Voter Registration Day. We partnered with KTRK, and that's Channel 13, and Univision as well. And I'm looking forward to finding out what the totals were. We had people calling just daily, just demanding that they be able to volunteer with us to register people to vote, and we let them. We needed all the help that we could get.
So now, if someone wanted to volunteer with the league, do they just go to the website, or what do they do? They
could call us at 713-784-3429, or they could email us at lwv@lwvhouston.org.
Okay, and I think the information is going to be on the screen right now, so we'll leave that up for a bit because...
If you've got your phone, you can just take a picture of that QR code.
Ah, look at that, moving in for the millennials.
I'm trying to keep up with y'all. We had a board meeting today using Google Hangout. Thank you very much.
Hey, look, technology is great, and so, we say technology is great, and then you alluded to something else, so I want to kind of pivot back to that. So technology is great when it works for the things that we want it to work for. Mm-hmm. And so early on, when early voting started, we heard there was some kind of remnants of malfunctioning machines, where when someone would go to cast their ballot, you have an opportunity, if you haven't voted already, I suggest you do so. And when you go to the polls, you can fill out who you would like to vote for. And then when you get to the end, before you select or confirm your vote and cast your ballot, there were complaints that said the people which whom they voted for were switched. And I think even there was, even our governor alluded to some of that. If you had those issues, you should consult or contact someone. So you mentioned earlier, so I wanted to kind of come back to that and hope you can shed some light on that.
We got a few calls initially, and we were concerned. And the more we heard about it, though, we realized that voters are emphasizing their favorite candidates. And Mark, if you can get to the slide, the ones, there are 3 slides. They're 10, 11, and 12 for the Hart InterCivic E-Slate. I can show some pictures here. So this first one, when you go into the polls, after you've put in your code, you would select what language you want to vote in, you want to read the ballot in. And then if you move on to the second slide, this is where, of course, when these were written, we can't write real candidates' names on there, so that's why there are things like chili and peach cobbler and fajitas and chicken fried steak to choose from. So then this is where you would select your candidates. And what will happen is when you select that candidate, the box next to that candidate's name is going to be highlighted. Then when you get to the end of the ballot, which is the next slide, you're going to have a ballot summary there, and that's going to show who you voted for. And you need to look that over. And you might see that what we were hearing was the presidential candidate was flipping, when indeed they weren't flipping, they were being deselected. And the reason that they were being deselected was people were coming in, they were voting straight party, and then they were clicking their favorite candidate again, kind of like for emphasis, not necessarily for emphasis, but wanting to make sure that that person was selected. And what happened is it deselected them. And so, you know, I don't vote straight ticket. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters, and I vote all over the place.
Yes.
And so when I do, I always check my ballot at the end. I go in with my list, and by the way, y'all can bring printed material such as our voter's guide. But I go in with my list, and then I go down the list and I select. But I had to go back 2 times and make corrections to where I thought I'd voted the way that I had, but I didn't. And in Harris County, I don't know what y'all's ballot is like in Pearland, or in Brazoria County, but in Harris County, we have got a big ballot. Yeah. And the selection page, at the end, the ballot summary is 2 pages long. Wow. So it is, you know, don't beat yourself up if you didn't get it right, but do go back. You have an opportunity to go back and correct that ballot. And then when you finally see that all your selections are right, then click Cast Ballot.
So is there an opportunity to ask for help?
Yes. If you think something's wrong, just raise your hand or holler out, I need some help over here. And generally the election judge is going to come over and help you. They might send a clerk over to help you, but more than likely the election judge is going to come. And in an election like this, the way that we were trained when I used to be a poll worker is that the election judge and then the judge alternate would come over because they represented the 2 different big parties. So there would be a Democrat and a Republican, and they keep their hands behind their backs as much as possible. Sometimes they might have to help somebody out, but there'd always be somebody there witnessing what the election judge was doing.
Okay.
Okay.
So now we talk about assistance, and then we've heard, I've also heard about watching. So I don't know if you can kind of speak to that, because I think through the state you have to actually register to be a poll watcher, or how does that work?
Well, if you're going to poll watch, you have to be a poll watcher for a candidate on the ballot. You can be a poll watcher for a candidate or for a measure, for or against a measure on the ballot. So we've got some propositions here in Harris County. And so that candidate actually fills out a form and gives you the form. And generally, if you were wanting to poll watch for the Democratic or Republican Party or the Green or Libertarian Party, you'd let them know, and then they might call you and say, we need you to go down and poll watch, and you would go somewhere and pick up this form and go where they tell you to go to watch. And you can watch anywhere from inside that 100-foot marker.
So you can cross the marker?
Yes, however, the election judge has to agree to what you're doing. So if the election judge, when you show up and you hand them your poll watcher form, and you say, I'm poll watching for Peach Cobbler, they say, well, that's great, you're going to sit right there. You do it, because the election judge has the same authority as a civil district court judge on that day. You can't interfere with the election. You can't talk to the voters. Your questions cannot be interfering with the process. Most poll watchers are trained to talk specifically to the election judge if they want to ask questions, but that election judge can also tell you you're going to be quiet while you're here. And you do that too, because they can ask you to leave. Another thing is that if you are a poll watcher, once you're in that polling location, if you leave before you've been there for 5 hours, then you can't come back if the election judge decides that they don't want you back in the polling location. But it's not, you can't just show up and say, I'm going to watch the election today.
Okay.
You need to get in touch. The best thing to do if you want to watch the polls is get in touch with the party of your preference. And I want to say by this time it's probably a little late, because they've probably trained most of their poll watchers already.
And so now this may seem trivial, but is all you do is just watch? I mean, what is your role as a poll watcher?
I have poll watched before, and the most fun I had was on Halloween night. It was the last day of early voting at the Sunnyside Multi-Service Center, and they were having a Halloween party. So the music was great, and it was 2008, and everybody was excited. But that judge told me, you sit right there, and you don't talk to anybody. So that's what I did. But I had a tablet with me, and I was to write anything down that I thought was irregular. Well, I didn't see anything that happened that was irregular. But if something had happened that was irregular, then I would report it. If I thought it was minor, I would wait until my 5 hours were up. If I thought it was major, well, then that's when I would have broken that rule, and I might have followed the voter out of the polling location to talk to them to get more information, to let the person that I was poll watching for know, and then they would take action from there.
So I guess poll watching is from the stance of the partisan, I guess a partisan stance, because you're there to protect the interest of those particular individuals or parties, correct? Would that be a safe?
Yes, and I would like to see it not be a partisan thing. I would love it if the League of Women Voters could go in and poll watch. And I tried a little bit to get involved at a higher level, but it didn't work. So any of y'all candidates out there that would like the League of Women Voters to be your poll watcher, give us a call.
So I guess what I'm asking is that if people have a genuine desire to want to help people at the polling locations, to get information, to help them so they don't have to stand in long lines, is there any avenue to do that?
Well, we can't prevent the long lines, but just to answer questions, there's, again, the organization Election Protection. If y'all want to get in touch with us at the League, we will let Election Protection know that you would like to volunteer. We're one of their partners. Okay,
and so because you mentioned something else, so and this is for the viewers and the people who are going to be waiting in lines, or hopefully not waiting in lines, but there is a distance, correct, that's established that candidates cannot cross. And what is it, 100 feet?
100 feet, and the election judge decides what 100 feet is. It could be 100 feet. Most times it's 100 feet from the door of the polling location.
Okay, yeah, I've seen it vary. They measure 100 feet from the machines or the polling or the door, and that 100 feet, candidates can't walk in. But also, if you're a voter, are you allowed to wear certain certain things when you go in?
You should not wear anything that represents your favorite candidates, and even little slogans. I saw somebody in my mother's county, Comal County, was arrested for wearing a hat that seems to be very popular with one of the campaigns. Well, he took the hat off, but he also had on a t-shirt that had a slogan. And since we're the League of Women Voters and we're not going to talk, negatively or about anybody,
Sure.
It could just, you just think of a slogan that has been said repeatedly within campaigns, and it was across this person's t-shirt. So they asked him to take it off, and usually what will happen is they'll give you that opportunity. You can go in the restroom and turn your shirt inside out or something like that, or put on a sweater to cover it up. But no buttons, no hats, nothing that has the candidate's name.
Sure. So you can't wear anything, even if you're a voter, beyond that 100 feet.
Right.
And then also, but you can bring in a pamphlet or literature, correct?
You can. You just can't pass it out. If it happens to be from your candidate, let's say you got a piece of mail, or from a political party, and you got that piece of mail, you can bring it in, but you can't pass it out.
Okay.
And you'll find that at some polling locations, election judges actually do pick up the League of Women Voters Guide, because people will show up and they say, I don't know anything about the candidates, and they'll refer them.
So you talk about the League of Women Voters Guide, which I happen to have a copy here. And if you are so inclined, I encourage you to go and pick one up. And where can we find these?
They're at all branches of the Houston Public Libraries, and I just had communication this afternoon from the Central Library that they've sent out a new stash to all of the locations in Houston, and it should be arriving tomorrow.
Because I know you were excited early on when this came out. It
flew off the
shelf. It flew off like within the first, so many days you ran out, right?
48 hours.
Well, yeah, it was gone. And so if you don't know what this is, it is the most comprehensive guide on the candidates and the issues that you'll be voting on. It has it from the top of the ticket all the way to the bottom in Harris County, correct?
Correct.
And so from president, congressional, sheriff.
The last on the ballot is going to be the Harris County Board of Education.
Board of Education, okay. And so, and then also if you don't know that this is a piece of paper and that you can read, and you're so used to electronic information, the League also has the same guide available at the website at lwvhouston.org, and you can download a copy into your phone, and you can't bring electronic devices into the polling locations.
No, you can't. We also have a website that's nationwide. It's called vote411.org.
Okay.
And if you put in your address at that vote411.org, only the candidates specific to your ballot will come up. And you can at least go through and select who you want to vote for and print out a list and bring it with you. But in Texas, you cannot bring any type of communications device into the polling location. And the reason now is because they have cameras, and Texas election code does not allow you to bring cameras into the polling location. The way things are now on our phones, if you were getting paid to vote, you could take a video of yourself and cast your ballot and then send it to whoever's going to pay you. And so I think that's the reason behind that. But vote411.org, I'm just going to say, it's a little cumbersome. But if you just really only want to see the candidates on your ballot, that's the way to go. And I'm not terribly pleased with it, but it is another alternative.
Continuous improvement.
Yes. Yes.
So we've got the voter's guide, we've got the online, we've got Vote 411, we've got the League's website, we've got in the schools, Empower 360, a whole multitude of ways to find out why it's important to vote, what you need to vote, what you should bring, what you can't bring. So, I've seen also people not only bring what they need to vote, but is it okay if we bring children or anybody else into the polls with us? What's the rules on that?
Well, you don't want to bring any other adults in there with you unless they're going to be voting too. And a good election judge should separate. If you come in with another adult, they'll generally separate you so that you're not influencing each other. And I've had this happen. I've had some overbearing husbands insist that they be able to vote next to their wives, and I've not allowed it. And
Really?
I even told one I would call the constable if he wouldn't let up. And of course he stood outside and told people that I wouldn't allow him to let his wife, let him be with his wife, and nobody cared.
So I mean, that's interesting, because what if, if I have some sort of physical...
Well, that you can.
Okay.
If it's obvious that if you say, I want this person to help me, but if somebody's coming in and says, I want to be with my wife,
Yes.
or I want to be with my husband, it could be the other way around.
Sure.
Then
It's not, you can't do that.
That's not acceptable.
Okay.
There's no law that prohibits that from happening, but we've been trained when I was an election clerk and judge, we were trained by the county clerk to separate people as they came in,
Okay.
so that they couldn't influence each other. But you can bring someone with you to assist you. Say you're disabled or you're not comfortable, maybe you're dyslexic, or maybe you're not comfortable with any of the languages on the ballot. You can bring someone with you to assist you. It just can't be your employer or your union leader. I don't want it, boss is a bad word. Union representative.
Okay. So, all right, no, that's interesting, because I've voted before, and voted for early voting, and sometimes when I do vote, I bring my children in to be able to kind of show them what it is. They're like, it's like a video game, but it's not. But it's interesting, because we want to make sure that, like you mentioned earlier, we pass that information along and tell them why it's so important. So we've got a few minutes left, and I'm not sure if we touched on everything we wanted to touch on, but I definitely want to leave our viewers with some words of encouragement and advice as to why this is so important. And I'll start with you, Amy. Hopefully we can get into that.
Well, thanks, Quentin. There were one more thing I wanted to let people know about, and that's transportation.
Okay.
If you don't have a ride to the polls on Election Day, Metro and Yellow Cab are offering assistance. So Metro's telephone number is 713-635-4000. You can definitely ride to the polls on November 8th for free by presenting your voter registration certificate. Their website address is ridemetro.org, and I believe that they may be offering rides to the polls tomorrow, but I'm not positive on that, so you may want to call them. Another group that's offering free rides to the polls, well, they're giving you a $35 credit, is Yellow Cab, and their telephone number is 713-236-1111. They're giving a $35 credit through tomorrow, and then it'll be a $15 credit on Tuesday. And so you need to think about that. If you're going to be going to an early voting location, you don't want to have the cab driver waiting for you, because that's going to run up the meter. So you need to be prepared to call Yellow Cab again to pick you up. There's an app you can download as well, but if you call Yellow Cab and ask them about the free rides to the polls, they will help you out. There are other organizations out there, but most of them are partisan, that are giving rides to the polls. If neither one of those works for you and you've got a favorite candidate, I recommend you get in touch with that candidate's campaign, because they want you to vote. So they're going to come pick you up.
So that's interesting. So, and I didn't think about it, but yeah, when you call them, they're going to be waiting, and so it's going to be adding up. So Yellow Cab is one, and Ride Metro.
Right.
So it's going to be vital that you know where it is that you have to vote. So when you call them, I didn't realize that service was there. So that's very encouraging. So,
but I've taken up a lot of time, so I want to let this young lady
for sure. So
No, that was some really good information that people need to hear, so that was great. So for Empower 360 Houston, again, that is the name of our program. It's super important for us to get this into as many high schools as possible in the Houston area, because we really want to increase the voter turnout and the voter participation in that younger demographic, especially with the city of Houston and the state of Texas and the country in general changing. It's very important that the voices of the people who are going to be here for the long haul are heard. If you need more information about the organization and the program, you can email info@empower360houston.org. We also have a website. It's empower360houston.org, and you can also find our curriculum, our engagement guide on the website as well as more information about Houston Black Leadership Institute, and we also have some voting information on the website too.
Okay, so a lot of information for you tonight. We hope that you're able to get as much as you need. We'll be sharing some information through the League website. You can also watch this again if you happen to miss something through the Houston Media Source on their YouTube or Vimeo page. So we want to make sure that we give you every opportunity, because it is vitally important that you get out. There are statistics that are coming out that Texas has increased voter turnout, which is great, because from the last statistics from the last elections, Texas was at the bottom, almost 47th out of 50 states as far as percentage of registered voters. So we're trying to give you as much information as we can to help you get out, exercise your right to vote, and we appreciate you tuning in and getting the information you need. Again, check out the League's website, Facebook page, Empower 360. Great resources to get out and exercise your right. Quentin Wiltz with the League, and we want to thank you for tuning in. So have a good evening.